Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone participating in this afternoon's webinar. My name is John Pace, and I'm a partner at Gelman, Rosenberg & Friedman, and I will be today's webinar moderator. I'd like to start off today with some quick housekeeping items and explain what participants need to do in order to earn today's CPE credit for today's webinar. Webinar participants seeking CPE credit for this presentation must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically following the webinar. Please write down the CPE words when they are given, as we are not allowed to provide them again. You will be asked to recall these words in order to receive CPE credit. If you have an active pop-up blocker, please take a moment and disable it now so it will not block the survey. Any technical questions about the survey may be addressed to Dominic, and you can see Dominic's email right on the slide on the screen. For best sound quality, we highly recommend that you connect by phone instead of using your computer. If you have any technical questions or issues arise during the webinar, please use the questions function to speak with our webinar administrator for assistance. Also, please note that this webinar will be recorded and it will be made available after the event, and the slides will also be posted. And you can see these links on your screen. As the title of the webinar implies, today's learning objective is to provide attendees with a better understanding of USAID-incurred cost audits. One CPE credit is available to attendees of today's webinar. So with that said, welcome to today's webinar, Survival Guide for USAID-Incurred Cost Audit Performed by a Commercial Accounting Firm. So this is presented by Gelman, Rosenberg & Friedman and Morris, Manning & Martin. So today we're going to take a couple of minutes to quickly introduce our speakers. We'll start left to right. So Paul Calabrese is a principal at Gelman, Rosenberg & Friedman with a successful track record of working with both nonprofits and government contractors. He has prepared the DCAA ICE submissions for government contractors and indirect cost rate proposals for over 100 nonprofits. Andrew Moore is a partner at Morris, Manning & Martin, LLP, and leads the firm's government contracts practice group. Mr. Moore represents clients in every stage of the government procurement process, from analysis of the risks associated with entering the market to issues arising during the solicitation, award, performance, and completion of government contracts. Also presenting today is Kelly Kroll. Kelly Kroll is of counsel at Morris, Manning & Martin, LLP, and also resides in the firm's government contracts practice group. Ms. Kroll has a wide range of experience that spans the entire range of federal, state, and local government contract formation and administration. She focuses her practice on clients who provide high-tech goods and services to all levels of government. So with that, we are going to turn over the first part of our presentation to Paul.
Hello, everybody. Well, we're just starting with the various sources, and as you can see, our whole presentation today really is based on and comes from regulations. So, you know, whether it's just the DCAA contract audit manual, where we're talking about some best practices, and USAID, ADS, and their regulations, and of course the FAR. So today what we're going to do is talk about the incurred cost audits, but this time from a commercial public accounting firm performing those audits, and some issues that clients have unfortunately experienced, and our experience in working with those clients and trying to resolve issues. Because we don't have a rule book, let's say, for how USAID should interface with contractors, we go back to when they use DCAA, and DCAA has all kinds of procedures and policies, and so we use that as a sense of best practices. And we'll also have an audit survival checklist, and then the legal team will be talking especially about how they respond to a contracting officer's decision and appeals process. So there's a lot of good stuff here, and we hope that it's helpful to you.
Okay, so we're going to jump right into our first polling question of the day. As a reminder, you need to keep track of these polling answers. So for CPE credit, have you been or will you be audited by USAID using a private accounting firm for an incurred cost audit instead of DCAA. So basically, have you had that experience, or do you expect to have that experience at this point? To give you the CPE code word for today for the first polling question, the first break, the first CPE word is cost. So again, once again, the first CPE word is cost, C-O-S-T.
All right. So it looks like 56 yes, 44 no. So that gives us a good sense. That's still a fair amount of people that have been impacted by these commercial reviews. Okay, let's go on. So for those who have just wandered into this webinar, we just want to say one line about what incurred cost audits should be doing, and that's the settlement, the annual submission, because you have CPFF contracts, and you're settling both the indirect rates and the direct costs by contract. And just a little advertisement here, we will be doing a webinar on the 12th, which John will be talking about, just how to prepare such a submission. And John will talk about that later. USAID, they have their own rules, and I was looking at the rules, and they, for just a background information, they've had an MOU with DCA for some time now, a good 20 years, to use them to perform the incurred cost audits. But as you know, in recent years, and all of us know, DCA unfortunately has been backlogged. It's easy to blame them. Sometimes their staffing goes up and down depending upon each administration and whether they can hire new people and so forth. I think they've gotten as high as 5,000. That was about what it was when I actually worked many decades ago. But anyway, but what happens is USAID now has pretty much opened it up to commercial agencies. One last point there is that there is an NDAA that was out that kind of, for a certain period of time, that's the National Defense Authorization Act, that limited what DCA could do in terms of the catching up. What they did was, I think for about a year or so, they suspended DCA from doing any other civilian agency audits. And so this really was important for USAID to continue their audits, to have commercial firms. And there it is. There's the citation where now the funding that's available for reimbursement either to DCAA or to commercial firms.
Yeah, Paul, we've represented contractors audited by DCA and by commercial accounting firms. We've seen it both ways. And with DCA, some of our contractor clients have experienced backlogs going 4, 5, 6 years, and it's really unhelpful for closing out contracts and settling costs, and leaves the contractor open to liabilities for far too long. So we understand why DCA and agencies like USAID have turned to commercial audit firms.
Thank you. So like I said before, DCA is reimbursed, by USAID, but let's face it, DCA is everywhere. They're even overseas. They're in like Germany and around the world, and they have quite a bit of footprint. And you try to compare that to a commercial firm that's just doing maybe in a certain area or region, or however USAID wants to use them, it's a little bit different. Their resources are quite limited. It's probably some kind of fixed price or fixed rate kind of contract, so there are limitations. And all I can tell you, and this is just my business intuition, because I've done proposals both in the CPA world as well as for government contractors, and I have a funny feeling someone like a partner probably brought in this work Because if you understand why they're having sometimes difficulties, you know, that person's the QC, the final review, and they probably have a good, strong audit manager. But the level of auditors, whether they probably seniors, maybe some supervisors, or that may have not had that experience, and we can tell that they're having a hard time retaining these people. I mean, you start out an audit with one group, you know, and then you don't hear from them, and then there's another group, then something happened.
Yeah, we ourselves prefer to work with DCAA if possible because they're experts in the field and they understand the audit manual, are familiar with government contractors, and they know what they're doing. We agree with you that commercial firms have much less of a knowledge base and have a higher turnover of personnel, which can cause problems during the process.
Great. To our second polling question of the day. The question is, our biggest concern with commercial firms is that the auditors, during the process, that wait until the end to inform you the costs, give us a week or less to respond to their findings. That's a good one. Do not perform a walkthrough to understand the process thoroughly, and do not provide sufficient details with their findings. So take a couple of seconds and give us your opinions on what your big concerns are. And in the meantime, we'll give you today's webinar's second CPE code word. That word is audit. So once again, that word is audit, spelled A-U-D-I-T. So we'll give you a few more seconds to answer the polling questions, and we'll continue on with the presentation.
So it's no surprise that, you know, 26% communication issues, 26% waiting till the end to inform us of unsupported or other things that you've got to achieve, or just the lack of sufficient details, which again supports what we're experiencing from our potential clients as well. So I kind of refer to this process as a dysfunctional audit. And a lot of these audits, from what I've heard, are also multi-year. Usually when they do multi-year, the max they do with one grouping is 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then, like if you have a 5 year, it's a 3 and a 2, and so forth. So we're going through an individual client that had these experiences. I've changed a lot, the information, but the time periods are effectively the same. So like if they were notified in November 16, and so basically they had a long entrance conference. You know, they said, we're going to do an entrance conference, but then they were there for 3 days. So already you can see by the person's statement, it wasn't very good communication. When you start an audit, you're supposed to tell all these basic things, and we'll go through that in a minute, and it's just, again, adds to the frustration. But that started, let's say, March. So that's like 4 months later. You know, you're notified, and then 4 months before they come out. Usually DCA, once they've notified you, they're there at your door. Hello, I'm your friendly neighborhood auditor, and I'm here to do an audit. You work out a couple of days to do the work and or dates, and they're good to go. And it gets wrapped up. I mean, they're going to say, you know, it could slip a little bit. Mm-hmm. But, you know, this kind of thing, I'd say within 45 days, 30 to 45 days, they're going to give you some kinds of results. Unless you're like Lockheed Martin, then they're there doing concurrent audits and all other kind of fun stuff. So there was less interaction until a week visit in July, 4 months later, and then another week visit in 2017. So it looks like, based on what I recollect, they've, you know, after this 2 weeks or so and 4 days, so almost 3 weeks, well, 2.5 weeks of field work. But when they came back in August, the entire team was changed. So that kind of, the only thing that would make sense, hopefully, because I know the situation is if they had a 5-year audit, the 3-year was done by one group, hopefully, and then the next would have been the 2-year, but, you know, you don't know. And they they start out saying, we'll give you, the information within a week of the field visit, and then all of a sudden they say, no, we can't do anything till we have rounds of internal reviews. There's nothing wrong with an internal review at all. I mean, definitely you want that stuff to happen, but it's like when they keep changing the rules or the goalpost, but they didn't provide a specific timeline, and that gets into my question is, they must have gotten an RFP from USAID. I mean, they're like a contractor to them. Within that RFP, there should have been a deliverable. I mean, if DCA was messing up on dates, you would think that in that RFP, right, they would have put dates like, okay, you stop, you start, we want you done within 60 or even 90 days. I don't know if all the rules in the RFP or not, but it might be interesting for another type of webinar at some time to, under the FOIA Act, find out what's going on with some of these people and see what they're supposed to do, because we don't know. And then, of course, finally, they weren't notified, for 6 months. There we go. And we wanted, they wanted to have an exit conference, but they gave them like 3 days notice. Now, it's one thing if you have an ongoing interaction with the auditors, then 3 days might not be a surprise. But if you haven't heard from them in a half a year or something, it's like, oh my God, what do I do? And, they promised certain things like an agenda, but there just was no communication of findings. And DCA's rules, as we'll find, is if they have something, they should talk to you about it. Because the whole idea is let's confirm. Or if you're missing something, let's, if that's in the early part of the audit, maybe by the end you got it. Because what's the purpose of doing it if you can't sustain it? I mean, when I was a DCA auditor, that would take, sorry to say, it would take all the fun out of it. If I'm going to question someone, I want it sustained. So, all right. Just wait a minute for MMM if they'd like to say something about this process.
No, we'll wait till the end of the dysfunctional audit scenario.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, sir.
Thank you.
So, let's go on. In the exit conference, you have a conference call. It just seems like they can do that. For a small little audit, just a small thing where they were checking your rates or something, I could see that. But this is a big audit, 5 years. You got to face you're the accuser. You got to face them and say, this is what we're disallowing, or at least a video conference, but not in person. It kind of takes away that thing. And, they did get their findings, the summary of findings, but the summary of findings or even the draft audit does not always tell you how they literally, if it's computing rates, they'll do something. You'll see that. But the backup sheets that say, this was the sample number, this was disallowed, all of those kinds of things. So, and of course, this is the first time they've heard about it. And this is maybe similar to what other people have experienced. And none of the findings had sufficient detail, really is what it came down to. How were the amounts determined? You want us to respond. Tell us the document number. Tell us, what is it? In some cases, it may be so specific in the questioning, that you could figure it out. But when you got little documents that were unsupported, you got to give us. Well, eventually they did get what they needed, but they had, unfortunately, about a week to respond, and they chose not to and just wait for the, respond to the draft report. When they found the final report, then they responded to that appropriately. They did ask for the audit work papers and eventually got it. But, the auditor could be a little proactive and say, look, I don't even have to give them the work papers. I can just cut and paste, give them the schedules where the issues are, let them address it. And then USAID sends a letter. This is some of the process. And they're a little bit more different than other agencies. And they break down well, for lack of a better term, an audit resolution group into a direct cost, which is at a contract audit management team, and then an indirect cost, and it's the overhead special costs and closeout team. So, you know, it's a little bit different the way that they have grouped these things together. Ultimately, one organization really said almost 3 years before they finally, from the day they were notified of an incurred cost for so many years. And I had another client, they questioned $1.4 million, but we got it all removed. Nothing was sustained, but that took quite a bit of an effort. And the last one, another firm, unfortunately, started out thinking that it was, treating a T&M like it was a CPFF, and that just didn't work. And I know that particular clients, they were very upset about it, and they kept, it was just a major, major concern to them. And a lot of people it is too, because they're kind of wondering when will this thing get resolved? Now I'll turn it over to MMM.
Thank you, Paul. We concur. We've seen many dysfunctional audits, and the problems you've described are spot on. We hope that this webinar, as we continue, will help you avoid a dysfunctional audit, but need to say that whenever audit problems are encountered, whether with DCAA or a commercial auditor, it's better to bring in your accounting experts and your legal counsel sooner rather than later. We know from past experience that we're far more effective and often ultimately less costly to the client when we're made part of the audit from the beginning rather than being brought in during a crisis or at the end when an adverse report is issued.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, Paul, looking at your example of a firm improperly auditing a T&M contract, that's the kind of thing that could have been prevented right from the get-go if you get people involved early in the process that understand that's improper on its face.
Okay, why don't we move?
I think we can proceed to the next slide.
So from a legal perspective, when you get the audit notice, what we try to do is formalize the audit process, which we mean to take control to the extent you can of directing the audit rather than letting the auditor run wild throughout the audit process. For example, when you receive the audit notice, the first notice, you don't necessarily have to agree to the proposed time and date of the audit, which might conflict with your business cycle or not give you enough time to prepare. You can also limit the auditor's contacts with your designated team rather than necessarily having them speak to just anybody in your company. You can agree on protocols for the audit team to present documents for you to review and comment on them and back and forth. So you want to try to control the audit process to the degree possible, and we call this the formalization. Very importantly, you need to have a non-disclosure agreement in place, an NDA. We recently ran into an example where we had a very large commercial auditor, one of the big three, come in and give my client a one-page NDA, which basically referenced their contract, that is the auditor's contract with DCAA. Well, that wasn't going to fly for us. If we had problems with the auditor's handling of our sensitive data or with release of sensitive data, we'd be left with having to go back to the agency and sue them to get any relief from their subcontractor, the large accounting firm. So we insisted and got a direct NDA with the accounting firm. This is just part of what we call, again, the formalizing the audit process. Paul?
Yep. Thank you, sir. So, In this section, we're just going to go over basically what I would call DCA's protocol or processes or even best practices in just focusing on the entrance conference, interim conferences, and the exit conferences, where you see an agency that's been doing this for many years, how they have expressed and want their auditors to follow, because this is their requirements, is to follow these issues. Okay. So, they're going to go through explaining the purpose of the audit, the overall plan for the performance of the audit, and they already talk about the estimate duration. Even when I was an auditor thousands of years ago, we had to tell them, this is a week, this is 3 days, we think we'll be done by then. We wanted them to know that too, because then that prompts them to make sure their data is ready. And we discussed the types of records and data required to perform the audit.
Yeah, the entrance conference is great, as are all the conferences you're going to have with the auditor. They're important turning points. But as the contractor, you need to document the conference, designate someone to take notes at each of the conferences, and then draft minutes and distribute those minutes to the auditor for comment, so that if there are no comments or when comments come back, you can finalize them and make them into a record that says this is what happened during the entrance conference. And this will be a theme from the legal perspective throughout the webinar. You have to document the audit process. Paul?
Okay. Thank you. So another thing that is very helpful is when the government, the auditor actually does a walkthrough. And basically a walkthrough is getting a full understanding, in this case, of what's required in the incurred cost audit. And this should be this may happen during the entrance conference. Sometimes it just can happen, but it has to happen in the beginning, because they have to understand where are your records, who's in charge of what, who's going to be your liaison, and those types of things. But also they're going to say, this is where our plan is, this is what we want to do, and so that's why we're focusing our questions, like, have you segregated unallowable costs and things like that? How do you do that? Do you use the 9000 series general ledger accounts? Do you use a charge code or a cost center? Those types of things.
Yeah, we agree that with a commercial auditor especially, you need to talk to them more and communicate with them more, because they may not be as familiar with the government contractor as certainly DCAA would be. So we certainly agree.
Interim conferences. So this is, as the audit is going on, continually, maybe it's not so formalized, or maybe it is, but they're starting to talk to you about what's going on, especially preliminary audit findings. Like I said, in my opinion, if I was an auditor, and even if I'm very aggressive, I can't put something in that I can't defend. And I don't want to look like a fool later, and like the situation where 1.4 million is questioned and then nothing sustained. Now, some of that may be related to the contractor and they had unsupported costs, so that can be understood. But still, I want to make sure, that then if that's the case, and I keep seeing a lot of unsupported costs, I probably would say to them early on, I'll be honest with you, contractor, I don't believe that these are all unsupported. I'm not going to get 1.4 million, you know what I mean? So I expect, go back to your records. Let's see what's going on here. There's no reason for that kind of discussion, to make sure, because I'm warning you, you don't get these documents, then, I have to question them.
Yeah, we agree that it's important to have constant communication to the greatest degree possible with the auditors, develop a relationship with them. By this time, you've had emails back and forth with the audit team. You've had many communications with them. And again, to the extent possible, you need to have these documented in emails. Hopefully the emails are aggregated at a central repository so you have a full record of them. And we can't emphasize enough that the record cannot be oral. It has to be documented in writing. Employees come and go, auditors come and go. You have to have this in writing. Paul?
Thank you. So let's ensure that the audit conclusions, are based on a complete understanding of pertinent facts. These discussions, as the government says, doesn't impair auditor independence. We're all just making sure, like Andrew has said, that are necessary to obtain, the sufficient documentation that's going to support their conclusions and question cost. Okay, we'll move along.
Yep.
So, upon completion of fieldwork, hold an exit conference. Well, in that one example, they held an exit conference, but 6 months later. I mean, it just you can't do that to someone. Even DCA, if we're going to give you pain, you're going to find out right away. Discuss the audit results. Obtain the contractor's view. So at this point, the government really wants to hear what you have to say. But like you saw in those examples, if you only got 7 days, if there's just one issue, yeah, you can respond to it that quickly. But remember, and this is something that these private firms don't understand, government contractors, they have limited resources. And they may be in the hot pursuit of a proposal. And I don't know if you ever been in that process. I know the people listening. It's pretty involved. And I mean, it's just very involved. And so, it's hard for them just to drop everything and do it if we can kind of get that scheduled a little bit, give them a little time. And so whatever the contractor's views and concerns are about the finding, and I've been in a few cases where the client has said, look, we know we don't have the documentation. Yes, we did this wrong, or this was unallowable. I mean, that does happen too. Don't think that everything is not going to be questioned. So if you know that something isn't right, fess up on it, and then deal with the stuff that's not right. The auditors will comment on the contractor's response to the audit results in their audit.
That's right, Paul. You don't have to accept the auditor's results. You can certainly question them, try to get comments in on their audit report, but you'll have, through the legal process, multiple chances to disagree with the audit results, which honestly, when I see them, I often take to be the auditor's bargaining position initially, because I see it rarely that all of the question costs will be sustained. There's usually some that are hard and some that are soft, and you have to work on those.
Unfortunately. Okay. So, even DCA says, if this is going to be like the situation where there was 1.4 million question or serious, they say, if USAID could attend, or at least give them the option to attend, and then they kind of get a sense of what's going to be coming forward to them, and you're thinking on it at least, if that could be done. So inviting a requester, the audit or the auditor should be doing that. Even if there are no deficiencies in question costs, and yes, even DCA recognize it could be a clean audit, have a courtesy, hold an exit conference, maybe even show up or something, show them that, I didn't put it in there, but that is a part of good relationships. It builds the kinds of things. So that's something to remember. Okay, information provided to the contract or anticipation of the audit. So they're going to provide generally a draft audit, and they'll provide it concurrently to the requester as well as the contractor. When I say there's no specific time requirement to give the contract response, I didn't see that in the DCA manual, which may mean they just play it by ear, and if it's little stuff, then, hey, get it back quick. If it's something complicated, the contractor should be speaking up and say, hey, I need more time.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. We agree. Again, you're going to have, the contractor's going to have multiple opportunities to respond. It can be at the exit, it can be after the exit, it can be with the agency, and certainly to the appeal process. It's an ongoing process, and it depends on whether the contractor's ready to respond based on how well documented the audit report is.
Did you want to talk about their rights under the audit, or are you going to wait till later on that?
We're going to wait till later. That Kelly's going to talk about the appeal process.
Oh, okay, that's the rights part. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So this kind of is 12 points. It's a checklist. It's a thing to think about, because you probably say, well, what's the answer? And we can see, as we hear from our legal team, document, 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 document. Write it down, be proactive with these people, but realize, and this is just my humble opinion, that you really can't control some of these auditors. And so then that's where you're going to have to document.
That's right. You can't control the auditor. Sometimes you'll get aggressive, assertive auditors that are just going to go off, and they're going to find deficiencies because that's what they're going to do. But you can still try to control the process so that it's orderly and managed, and like you said, and we agree, well documented.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked about this already somewhat, but we're stressing it here again. Formalizing the audit process through letters back and forth to manage it, to control it. You can use emails, but honestly, when it comes to audits, we more often than not try to put it into letters that are a bit more formal. I think they get the attention of the person you're writing to a bit more than just an email. And formalizing it is something that we spend a lot of time on, but it's really important. Paul?
Another suggestion is establishing a prime and alternate point of contact to interface with the auditors. It should be hopefully one person. Otherwise, you got people saying a different story, and then that really, DCA is going to get in the way. You're saying a different story and so forth. So the person that you feel is most knowledgeable.
Yeah, we agree. You should establish your audit team and limit contact to them, because otherwise, just like you said, we run into different stories, and you'll have the auditor contacting someone that you would prefer them not to. So I agree. Establish your audit team and limit contact to them.
So you got to know the audit process in order to keep the auditors on track. So the more you know by hopefully through this webinar, but also through kind of looking at what DCA has to say and their best practices, okay, there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and the end, and there should be some conferences, there should be some communication, and just, again, I know who their audit manager is. That's going to be the person if you have some issues or complaints. But the more you know, hopefully you keep reminding them, this is what you're supposed to do, right? That kind of thing. Andy?
Yeah, no, I agree. You want to come to an understanding with the audit team of what they're trying to accomplish. Make sure they understand you and your business and what's going on with this incurred cost audit. So it's important to communicate with them and keep them on track and constantly communicate.
Document. Take the notes. one of our clients took some of the most excellent notes I've ever seen. I mean, it was well organized and so forth. And so, like, when she asked me to help, I could just fully understand, even if I forgot, go back to her notes and so forth. And I'm sure it's the same for the legal side, but we'll let Andy address this.
Yeah, no, we've talked about, this has probably been the primary theme that we've made, is documenting the audit. One thing that comes to documents is that certainly with millennials involved, sometimes people will use text. I've seen this before. And I tell all my clients, no texting at all. It's very hard to recover or retain later on. While you can have a personal relationship with the auditors on the other side, you don't want to get into texting. So document, yes, but texting, no.
So I also believe that, you know, if DCA requires it, and I'm probably sure that the commercial firms require at the beginning of the entrance conference, you know, they're getting the names and titles of everyone. You ask for their names and titles and contact information so that you know who is really the key person on this audit if there's some issues. Andy?
Yep. Yeah, we agree. Absolutely.
Okay. And again, but continue to take those notes. So they all kind of work together, and maybe we're saying it in a different way, but in all the meetings, and don't forget to record the date, because I think that's important to know. Just like when I do notes for my stuff, I write down the date. And believe it or not, every time I talk, you know, even with the partner here or other people, I say, you know, this is JP and he's on it, and whoever, because it just helps recollect in my mind, you know, what the situation is.
Yeah, absolutely agree. You know, again, we're documentation and notes. Paul?
Okay. And to be very proactive with the auditor during all phases of the audit. You know, just be involved. Don't be away from things and so forth. You know, get yourself involved because you know the audit. We're going to try to move this along because I realize it's limited time and we've got some good stuff to do. If the auditor won't agree or permit an inclusion of your facts, USAID will. So don't get overly upset about that. Your response should be well organized as far as question costs and findings. I found that the biggest thing that is missing sometimes is these consultant agreements. I think this happens because there are field offices overseas, and they may close down before the entire contract does, or it's been many years. So try to make sure you have a very well-organized and document retention system. So now we're going to turn it over to Andrew.
Yeah, I agree with the statements you made. Just before we get into the Contract Disputes Act, which Kelly Kroll's going to lead, be cooperative with the auditors. Auditors are people too. You want to communicate with them and develop some trust, because ultimately, if they don't trust you, if they think that you're trying to hide something or you're not being fully responsive to them, you're not engaged with them, there are going to be problems. So it's important to engage and be cooperative and be proactive with the auditors. Yeah. Kelly?
I would just put a little caveat on that before we move on to this, is just to not be overly helpful.
I agree.
Not to volunteer information not asked, obviously, and not to go down or open doors that they have not opened or asked about. So just my little 2 cents on that.
I would agree with you there.
So you've got your audit report, and you're not happy with the findings, and it's important for you to understand that the contracting officer your contracting officer on your contract does not have to agree with an auditor's findings. They often do, but sometimes the contracting officer will side with you, as the contracting officer may have a better understanding of the facts for your particular contract and your previous discussions of previous dealings, and what the parties agreed to or intended to agree to. So it's important to keep your communication lines open with the contracting officer, because they can enter into a settlement agreement, maybe come to some sort of settlement agreement at any time, including after the submission of a claim. This could also, this keeping the communication line open can also include talking with agency legal departments to try and hash out any issues with them before taking more formal action. We often will reach out to agency counsel to try and resolve the issue before filing a claim. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's worth a try. In addition, some agencies will agree to enter into alternative dispute resolution process to try and resolve the issue. Some contracts even require it, that you go through the ADR process prior to filing a claim. So if you have an audit report and you need to review your contract, see if there's an ADR provision first before going the next step, which is filing a claim.
Yeah, and the ADR is basically like arbitration or mediation, but in the government contract context.
Right. So if you ultimately, through maybe working these other channels, can't come to an agreement, that's when the Contract Disputes Act and the Disputes Clause at FAR 52233-1 kicks in. The FAR outlines the minimum requirements for submitting a claim, which I'll talk about after our next poll question.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So we've reached our next poll question. So we want to open this up to the group. If you have or currently have or in the past have had audit findings, how have you found the process for preparing a response? Are you having difficulty with that? Is that something that's easy for you? And while you take a few seconds to answer the polling question, we'll give you today's final CPE code word. And so that code word for today is exit. Again, poll CPE code word question number 3 is exit, EXIT. And I can tell you from firsthand experience with our client group so far that, we do find that our clients do have, at least some stress, some concern about preparing responses to auditors. The audit process, can be intimidating. It can be confusing. It can be a little bit overwhelming. So one of the things that we've done quite a bit is help the clients through crafting a response, reviewing those responses, going back and forth, having phone calls to really help navigate our clients through that process. And we think that process and approach works pretty well. And it looks like for the group, actually it's a fairly confident group. So most of you are good success preparing your response to the audit. So that's great. So with that, turn it over. Okay, it's back to Kelly and Andrew.
Okay, thanks, John. There's no required format for filing a claim, but a minimum, and I'm reading right from the FAR clause there noted at the top, a claim must be in writing and submitted to the contracting officer. It must seek as a matter of right the payment of money in a sum certain, the adjustment of a contract terms, or other relief arising under the contract. So it doesn't have to be all about money. It could be about interpretation of terms, such as ceiling rates on a contract or things like that. So it doesn't have to be exactly about money. The claim must also include a required certification language if the claim exceeds $100,000.
And there's the certification language is directly in the FAR,
yeah.
And you have that there?
I wasn't going to read it, but yeah, it's actually in the FAR provision at subparagraph D of that FAR provision.
We suggest that you use that verbatim.
Right, because if you don't use it verbatim, then it will be considered defective. The claim should also, in addition to these required minimums, should of course include a description of the dispute and be supported by facts. Legal arguments, if they're directly on point, could be added to the claim to help its validity and to help the agency understand, but the legal arguments aren't necessary at the claim level. And then, of course, the claim should be executed by someone authorized to bind the company. Just want to stress the first point about submitting it to the contracting officer. It needs to go to the contracting officer, not the contracting specialist, not the program manager, not the payment office. It has to go to the contracting officer to be a valid claim. When you submit this claim to the contracting officer, it's often referred to as a request for a contracting officer's final decision, or COFD. So you'll hear me refer to a COFD going on. So invoices and other routine requests for payments that aren't in dispute when you submit them are not claims. So even if they are in dispute, it might not pass the legal test for a claim. So you really want to make sure that you're making clear to the agency, this is a dispute, this is a claim, so that you can trigger the timelines for moving this down the road. And then we can just move on to the next slide then. Sorry.
There we go.
Okay. So there's a timeline associated with this, with filing a claim. So that's why I stress, filing the claim properly, so you don't waste unnecessary time having your claim, denied as defective or not acted upon, etc. The claim has to be submitted to the contracting officer within 6 years after accrual, and accrual is defined as when the claim was known or should have been known. And as you can guess, that's kind of an objective test, so it could get really messy. So my recommendation would be, in most cases, to file your claim as early as possible. You shouldn't wait on, for example, assurances from the contracting officer that they might work something out, or we'll see, maybe, next year we can change something. Kicking the can down the road is not the answer. So you want to act on filing your claim as soon as, you have a general idea that this is a problem. After submission of the COFD, the contracting officer has 60 days to reply for claims of $100,000 or less. Or if the claim is over $100,000, then the contracting officer has 60 days to notify you of a new date when they will give you a decision. So they have the right to kind of give themselves a little bit of an extension. Usually that's only for like another 30 to 60 days, but they do have a little bit more time. If the COFD is not issued after the 60 days or the new date set by the contracting officer, then the claim is deemed denied and an appeal can then be taken. One thing I'd like to note, and I get this a lot, is that there's a dispute and a client will say, well, we're gonna walk off the contract. We're gonna stop working. Well, that's not allowed. You need to keep working, and it even states as much in the FAR clause 52233-1, specifically states that the contractor will proceed diligently with performance of the contract pending final resolution of the claim. So you need to keep working on the contract instead of walking off site. I get that question a lot. So the contracting officer's final decision is final once you receive it, or if it's a deemed denial. If you do receive a contracting officer's final decision, it should state your appeal rights. But if it doesn't, then you have 90 days to file an appeal either at the appropriate Board of Contract Appeals or within 12 months to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. I say the appropriate Board of Contract Appeals because there are two of them. There is the CBCA, which is the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, or the ASBCA, the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals. In USAID's case, obviously, the correct board that you would file at would be the CBCA. There's certain pros and cons associated with which appeals court you choose. With respect to the board, I would say that the pros associated with that, I guess it really kind of depends on the cost of your claim. The board has a small claim procedure for claims under $50K. If you're a small business, or under $150K if you're a large business. They also have accelerated procedures for claims of $100K or less. So if you have a small claim, definitely want to go to the board. You don't want to go running off to the Court of Federal Claims with a $100K or a $75,000 claim. Wouldn't you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I would. The boards were established to be sort of like arbitral or arbitration boards with the contractors, and they are less formal than the Court of Federal Claims, as Kelly's going to talk about, which deals with, black robe judges and Department of Justice on the other side. So the ASBCA and CBA are normally preferred unless it's a really big case, in which case you would then go to COSTI, the Court of Federal Claims.
Right. So obviously going to the board, it can still be a costly procedure. It can take longer than the Court of Federal Claims in some cases. At that level, you're dealing with the agency's attorneys versus the Department of Justice when you get to the Court of Federal Claims. as Andrew said, really, when you go to Court of Federal Claims, it really is for much bigger cases. And you're dealing with DOJ at that level, which, in my opinion, DOJ is generally more open to settlement than maybe agencies' attorneys. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
They are, true? I think. I would agree with you. We have had good success dealing with DOJ. They're generally commercial litigation branch attorneys. They're not quite as invested in the agency. They just want to get a good result, but they are open to settlement.
Right. And then, but in general, I think most of our appeals go to the board level, and a lot of them settle. I mean, it might not get it's not a 100% winner every time, and a lot of times ends in settlement, but sometimes that's the best answer to be done. And so once you file, so a lot of our clients, I think, are hesitant to file the claims, hesitant to file the appeals, but in the end, it really works out a lot.
It does. You can have difficulty at times dealing with the CO. They don't want to make a decision. Sometimes they're scared of going out on a limb. But if you file the appeal, you then the agency has to respond with an attorney. Recently, we filed an appeal, and even before the time for us to actually file the complaint, 30 days later, we're now settling the case.
Yeah.
Because we finally got the agency's attention, and we're now dealing with an attorney. We told them what our problems were, and we're settling the case. So just because you file an appeal, or to begin with, the claim for the COFD and then an appeal, doesn't mean you can't settle the case. And it's just raising the profile of this matter to show them that you're serious. And it allows you to talk to the attorneys.
Yeah, and if you file the claim and you don't go forward with the appeal process, then you essentially forfeit your claim. So, I recommend it in all cases. It's a business decision, I think.
Of course. Ultimately.
So, yeah, I kind of ran through that, but I wanted to make sure we finished on time. So I'll turn it back to you, John.
Great, thanks, Kelly and Andrew. We've reached a point where we have a couple of questions that have come through, and this is always good. So our first question actually is for Kelly or Andrew. This is a good one. What would you suggest if one of the auditor, something that the auditor asks you for is information that you think is really outside the scope of their request, or that they really shouldn't be asking it? What do you do in that situation?
Well, I would, obviously put it on hold and be like, wait a minute, I be honest with them, just be like, I think that's outside the scope of what we're doing here, and I need to talk with, someone else, make someone else. I need to go back and consult with someone else, and you can come and you can consult with your accountants or your legal counsel and get them involved and help them to control that situation.
Yeah, you have to, escalate it. Rarely do you want to stop an audit and say, no, you're not going to get this document, but you can certainly make it go to a higher level of their management as well as yours. And ultimately, if you have to, you could just say, no, we're not going to provide that document. You can put that in your audit report, and we'll say why we didn't give it to you. But you don't have to go along with them.
Because we have seen, like, this is, now I'm dating myself, but this was back when paper was still a thing. And auditors would run amok in the office, pulling out file drawers and looking at things. And I had a client who called me, and I was like, ask them to stop. And then they were afraid to do so, but you just need to search yourself, and you're right.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. One more. We have time for one more quick question. This is one we've answered quite a bit, actually. So, Paul, this one's for you. What types of contracts or thresholds prompt a USAID-incurred cost audit?
Basically, there are no thresholds. We wish that there were, but it's basically, do you have CPFF contracts? And we have seen even a very small amount of CPFF contracts requiring the contractor to respond to it. I would just want to say one thing. If there are any other questions we can't answer here, we promise that we will get back, provided to both the auditors and to us, and we will respond to those questions.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. With that, today, GRF and M&M would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We would like to encourage you to always check our website and MMM's website, and you can see on the screen here that we have upcoming events, and we have couple of events coming right up, March 12th, just next week. And so a lot of great information going on here. This is part of Paul's 5-part series on government contracting and navigating those waters. So this is, also to receive updates on what we're doing and what Morris, Manning, and Martin LLP is doing as well, you can subscribe to our newsletter and their newsletter, and you can see the web address right there on your screen, right there on your slide deck. So please, just logistically, please remember to complete the emailed survey that will follow if you'd like to earn CPE credit for today's webinar, and just make sure you don't lose track of those 3 code words. And once again, thank you so much for spending time with us today, and we look forward to having you on future webinars. Thank you so much.